Hello, and welcome to the Holistic Nurse Academy, where we bridge Eastern and Western medicine and hold conversations with other practitioners and nurses alike who are doing great things. And this week seems to be about advocacy and talking about the nurses side of things, where we're bringing in how traumatic it can be on the nurse's end and what we do when we love our profession, but we also know we're in a really harsh environment. So, because of that, we have our expert on nurse trauma, Dr. Lorre, who did ask to be called Dr. Lorre, even though it's Dr. Lorre Laws. Hi, Dr. Lorre.
Hi, thank you so much, Holly. Thank you for having me on your show. And just, it's such an honor to connect with your beautiful community. So I'm looking
Yes,
forward to our conversation.
me too. Me too. Well, I did myself I don't know, a favor and a disservice all at the same time this week where I booked 2 authors. So I had a lot of reading to do. But it was all good, and one of the things that came up for me is, well, maybe I have some more healing to do in this, uh, in this conversation. So it did bring up a lot of the things that, steered me in my nursing path as to where I'm at today. And it definitely was, a lot of trauma along the way. But
Yeah.
I tried to kind of leave with some grace and hold my head up and do, like you, wanted to keep my license and I wanted to do something productive with it.
Right.
So, but some people don't have the capacity to do that, or they have to completely choose a different career because they were never given the tools or the validation. So talk to me about your journey to erasing the term burnout and calling it what it is, which is PTSD.
Yeah, well, that's a big question, but I'm going to try and give you
Yeah.
the cliff notes. And just since you mentioned my book, I'll just put the title
Yeah.
out there for anybody who's
Yeah.
interested.
Please
It's
do.
called "Nursing Our Healer's Heart," and it's a recovery guide for nurses who are experiencing trauma and burnout. Which, as it turns out, Ner burnout, spoiler alert, burnout is a symptom cluster of nurse-specific trauma, and we'll unpack that in a minute. But what really led me in this path is I got my start as a CNA in 1976,
Wow.
so a long minute ago, and I wasn't in the profession that whole time. I had, other things, and I came back in my 50s and, was gonna get back into the profession, and, this whole burnout thing that we were experiencing in the '70s, it was worse
Yeah.
even
Wow.
than, and so, when you're a 50-year-old woman and you're pivoting and recareering, um, you're less likely. You've raised a family, you've had a whole 'nother career.
Right.
You are less you can see it for what it is
Right.
in a different way, and I think that's part of why my life story unfolded in that manner. And so I tapped out of I earned my master's to entry into the practice and that's what I was planning to do. I was planning to do hospice nursing, and it turns out my eldest daughter is a hospice nurse. So right signal, wrong person.
That's funny.
And I was a heck no to practice under these conditions because I have like many of us, we have very profound trauma stories that don't need to be relived or unpacked. But I recognized, and I already knew how that was going to impact me. And so I kept marching and I enrolled in a DMP program right after, thinking that surely it will be better in primary care. And I completed the whole curriculum except for the 1,000-hour practicum when we were being trained to
Mhm.
have 12 to 15-minute patient encounters. Well, it takes me that long to just say good morning. I'm a
Right.
talker and I'm a
Right.
deep feeler and I'm a deep healer. And I think most nurses, that's why we came in, is because we really want to serve in those deeper ways and not on an assembly line sort of mechanistic process, right? So enters in this existential crisis again. It's like, well, I can't practice in acute care and I can't practice in primary care. Like, what am I doing? And I mean, it was a really big thing. And then it started coming through that I couldn't make the changes in the system for our profession if I were encumbered by it in practice. That was sort of the download that came through after sitting with it for some time. And I mean months. I was just really like kind of at a loss. And so I got into the PhD program, and my family and friends are like, "What, could you make up your mind?" But, if you're not in the profession, looking from the outside, it looks like I was, having some midlife crisis, but really I was trying to find my lane
Yeah.
in a way that was going to be safe and healthy. And so when I got into conducting research and I got into neuroscience, and by divine intervention or coincidence, however one rolls in their belief system, I found myself teaching at the University of Arizona, from which I just recently retired, in their College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. And I was teaching in a pre-health program, getting them ready to come into nursing programs or allied health programs or even pre-med students, right? So it was kind of that kind of preparatory program. And what that, I was doing my PhD dissertation work at the time on, on stroke research, but I'm over here and I'm in this milieu over here of social and behavioral sciences. And I'm watching all of my friends from nursing school like face plant, like everybody does,
Mm,
right? You get
yeah.
into practice, and then the first thing it does is grind you up, and then it spits you out, and then it's rinse and repeat from there.
Yeah.
So I got less interested. Not that the stroke population isn't very dear to my heart, because they are, but I became very interested in this research question that was sort of coming through of, what if it's not burnout?
Mm.
I mean, 50 years I've been around, in and out of the profession, but a half of a century, you know,
Yeah.
and why haven't we, after spending as an industry, as scientists, as all of us working together on this quote unquote problem, why haven't we moved the needle? And because I was over at the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, I was looking outside. I was looking in the nursing evidence base
Yep.
because I'm a nurse scholar,
Yeah.
but I also am looking inside. I'm going multidisciplinary. So I'm looking in fields like neurophysiology, relational neuroscience, transpersonal neurobiology. And I'm like, it I mean, it was like one of those, like, every day I was picking my job off the desk. And so as again, divine orchestration or coincidence would have it, then the College of Nursing at the University of Arizona was starting its very first integrative health-focused BSN program. I
Nice.
was like, "Oh, heck. Oh,
Yeah.
heck yeah." Because I was a healer long before I was ever a nurse. I've been a
Yeah.
healing arts practitioner for 40 years now, and in various modalities. And so it was like, what do I need to be, say, and do to get over? Because I mean, I was full body, yes. I need to be here. And my credentials apparently were compelling enough, and I took I did a nurse coach program,
Yep.
and really just started getting myself prepared. And what I found was that it felt like we were pushing, based upon the research I was doing, it felt like we were pushing our new grads off a cliff.
Oh,
You know, we've all heard, oh, there's the nursing school way, and then there's the real world way,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so I started asking even bigger research questions, and I started doing like symptom cluster analysis, which is a geeky way of saying that I scraped the bottom of the evidence base in all of these disciplines, because now I self-describe now as a pit bull with a bone in her mouth, and she is not letting go. Like, it's locked in. I cannot let this go.
I love it so much.
And so that's when I really started doing this research and writing the book, because what I was finding, and I don't want to like bash science, because I'm a scientist and it has its place, and it has an important place, and there's also a lot of bias
Mm,
in the process, in terms of what your institution will allow you time to do and resources do, and how the grant funding process is. And every time your research question gets whittled away, well,
mm.
we're not sure if there's anything on trauma, but why don't you go study this thing on burnout over here? Why don't you go study this? And I'm just not really responsive to people telling me what to do, including me. It's a real problem over here. And so it became clear that I was going to self-fund this research through my nonprofit, and I formed a different nonprofit, and I have self-funded, and I brought the book out, and now have healing programs
Yeah.
for nurses. And I had a very supportive university. So this isn't a university thing. It's just kind of the mechanism of how it all works. And then when you do get your research completed, then you need to get it published in peer-reviewed journals, and that editorial board decides what can show up in the article or not. And then the real reason is that what nurse has time to go find that research? Right?
Right,
Buried in the ivory towers somewhere,
right,
or behind a paywall
right.
that would cost $60 for one article. And
Wow.
so I really was, again, it kind of circled back to that first awareness of I can't bring forward what I'm being called to do in my healer's heart, what matters most to me, from this deep place of love and caring, why I'm here in
Yeah,
this profession, if I'm encumbered by these systems that are gatekeeping, and it being these invisible hands that are steering what really needs to happen. And so it's like, well, okay. All right, and I had no idea what I was getting into. Know that. I had no idea what was coming. But that's the path I have chosen, and I'm grateful for it, because what I'm really doing is able to bring the purest science, which has been peer reviewed for my book. So there's 5 experts that peer reviewed. And so this is, I'm following all the rules. It's just, how am I bringing it into the public arena in a way that it's so accessible for nurses,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Where for $10 you can read the book. I have free resources, a resource vault. I have free weekly live calls. I have paid programs for people and they're accessible because a nonprofit is doing this. This isn't like,
Yeah.
um, vulturing off my profession that's suffering. So
Yeah.
that's a very long answer
Oh,
as
yeah.
to how did I find myself here, that spans, quite frankly, a half a century.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, and I have so many questions about, you know, different aspects of this. So first of all, can you define the difference between burnout and trauma for us?
Yeah, and I'm gonna go real conceptual here, because the nurse brain is oftentimes a traumatized brain that tends to
Yeah,
shift into the left hemisphere, and we kind of
yeah,
lose that relational brain coherence.
right.
So burnout, and I'll just go with World Health Organization, because it's ridiculous, is an occupational phenomenon. That means your occupational stress is not being effectively managed,
Okay.
and so it points the finger
At
at
the
At
in
the person yeah, at the nurse, essentially, here.
yeah,
And the interventions for burnout tend to be top down. They tend to be cognitive. They tend to be all the things we've heard that we know aren't true, and are used to gaslight and empathy manipulate nurses, such as, you need to do more self-care, as if nurses who deliver the actual care don't know how to do that. I find that so condescending
Yeah.
and, patronizing
Yeah.
to professionals who have a license that literally deliver care and save lives or facilitate transitions at end of life. You know, so like, bringing in new life and so, yeah, we know how to take care. That's a thing we do.
Yeah.
And then also the challenge of like, well, it's, you're just not resilient enough. Again, pointing the finger
Right.
and creating this subconscious programming that somehow the nurse is unworthy.
Mhm.
Somehow they are not good enough. There's a deficit. They aren't strong enough. They aren't tough enough. They aren't fill in the blank enough, right?
Yeah.
These are what all these burnout messages will say. And then my other favorite one is we need for you to have better work-life balance. If you would just learn how to manage your life. But wait, we know that you can manage all of these patients and all of these drips and all of these lines and all of these medications and all of this psychosocial. We know you can manage all those things, but we're pretty sure you don't know how to balance your life when we are pinging your phone 24/7
Right.
and calling on your off hours and blowing up your inbox and
Mm.
requiring you, which I would highly, just as a side note, they're now requiring us to download apps on our phone. Get a burner phone. Do
Yep.
not put anything on your personal phone. There are horror stories coming out about because you're giving privacy to your whole phone, and
Yeah.
including your location.
Wow.
So just as a side note. And so we have over here in this burnout camp, this whole like, it's all mental, it's all you have a deficit, you need to do better
Yep.
because, the system knows best.
Right.
And this is why I started doing the research. I'm like, well, what if? And I've now surveyed over 1,000 nurses. I've worked with over 1,000 nurses. And I said, well, so I did two surveys. Each had about 400-ish give or take, because some of the data was duplicate and blah, 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 geeky things. But,
Mhm.
um, I was looking at the attitudes, and this is what most burnout interventions and the narrative, the purple Kool-Aid that just keeps a half a century of how nurses aren't fill in the blank enough,
Right.
right? And so, we look at the attitude and it's like, yeah, well, it looks like nurses are just dissatisfied and leadership this and yada yada. And it was just like so I said, well, now let's measure what the body says. Because the way trauma works, and I'll just give the definition as a segue in, I
Okay.
like Gabor Mate's definition of trauma, which is very general, but it's not necessarily what happens outside of you, it's what happened inside of you as a result of what happens to you. And then when I was doing all this other research outside nursing, there's Besser van der Kolk who's like, yeah, the body keeps score. So what
Mhm.
doesn't get processed and integrated at the time of the event or the situation gets stored in the body, primarily in the muscles, in the fascia, and the neuroplexes, and of course in the energy field. And then we look to the work of Dr. Bonnie Badenoch, who is a relational neuroscientist, and it's like the reason that this trauma doesn't get integrated, and we probably need to unpack what is nurse-specific trauma. It's just coming through right now, so we'll get to that. But the reason that the body has to store it is not only do we not have the tools we need, if they're calling it burnout and we're doing all the burnout things, are we getting to root cause? By definition, we are not. And so not only is it about the tools, but it's having the people that we perceive that we need before, during, and after.
Yeah.
We heal in community.
Right.
As mammals, we have survived the millennia because we co-regulate. We're highly social beings. But the system would gaslight us and say, well, go in the cave this weekend and lick your wounds and have a bubble bath and light a candle and go do your gratitude to journaling because you should be so fortunate to be treated like this,
Right.
says the
Yeah.
system. And so what I found is when and I will soon be bringing these results forward. I sent everything over to my statistician last week, and the preliminary findings are compelling. Um, and um, and then when we ask the body what the body symptoms are across the physical, emotional, relational, mental, cognitive, and spiritual existential worldview domains. Okay, so the 5 big pillars of health that we all know, right?
Yeah.
Well, what we find is a very different story. And that's where, at the end of the symptom cluster analysis process and the follow-up studies that I've done through my nonprofit now, because now I just, am retired from academia, so I can pursue, the last 5 years of my career. This is what I'm doing with it. And this is where it's like, wow, 76%. I'm just going to throw some fun facts out for you.
Okay. Yeah.
76% of, quote, burnout symptoms
Yeah. Yeah.
map directly to nurse-specific trauma. 96% of nurses, 96% have one or more PTSD symptom, and nearly 1 in 4 meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD.
Yeah.
Nurses have more trauma exposure than military combat personnel. When you look at nurses and you say how many nurses, and studies have been done on this, how many nurses have resources and support for the trauma exposures? And I'm not just talking about the ones that come. We need to unpack that next, but because there's so many more than the ones that probably everyone's thinking about right
Right.
now.
Right.
But when we look at this, just broad strokes, 83% of nurses say they have little to no support for trauma at all. And of those who have resources and support, about the same number don't use um, provided, employer provided services
Right.
because of the stigma. And also, from the lens of my work, it's like asking a firefighter to go meditate inside of a burning building.
Yeah.
They've spent billions of dollars making gyms and wellness programs and apps and all of these wonderful things. And then they wonder why these programs are largely unattended. Well, you can't ask a nurse to go into the place that traumatized them to do their vulnerable, deep healing work.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, why I pulled my work out of these systems, put it in a nonprofit, international, so we can have a safe virtual space for that healing to happen.
So it feels like there's a big gap, like just kind of listening to you and kind of with my own experience. I feel like there's still a pretty knowledge gap for even nurses that they are traumatized and to
Yep.
give them that permission to identify it and do something about it. What are your thoughts on that?
There's I'm going to quote Dr. Marilyn, who was on my dissertation committee. And when I was figuring out, like how to even do this as a student, right? Which is
Yeah.
a little, it's like you're at the bottom of the mountain and it's like, there's no way I'm getting to the top of this thing. But she said to me, and this is what it is, you got to find the gap. If you're going to be a nurse scientist, you have to find the gap in the evidence base.
Hmm.
And then you need to drive a Mack truck through
Yeah.
it.
Right.
And so so I'm the Mack truck,
Yeah.
and I'm doing everything in my power. And I'll tell you, it's like grandma over here is trying on social media. It is not, it's just like, I'm a nurse scientist. I'm literally a grandma, I'm signing up for Medicare right now. It's like, it's hard to, it's being being on social media in the ways that requires, but I have to go where the nurses are.
Right.
And so I'm on all the syndicated outlets, and I, of course, do podcast interviews, and I record a podcast myself each week just to, to get the message out. And I'm just trusting the divine orchestration of it all,
Yeah.
that the message, the science, the healing modalities, the frameworks that have emerged from my research are finding the people that need them the most. I have to trust that. But that is the biggest gap. And the system, quite frankly, would
Yeah.
prefer that this not meet the light of day. And that's what I found on the back end when I was trying to get grants, when I was trying to, get studies going while I was within the academic, NIH, the machine, the research machine. And there are 10,000 ways that they can paper cut the truth. By the time you see it in a peer-reviewed journal, assuming you can even find it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
It's been whittled away to where it's lost fidelity and
Yeah.
in terms of what really needs to happen. And so, I think the biggest message I can make is that it's not burnout. If 96% of nurses are having PTSD symptoms and nearly 1 in 4 have PTSD, diagnostic criteria met,
Yeah.
well, then, and 76% of symptoms overlap. But like my dad would say, if it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, maybe it's a duck.
Yeah.
Maybe it's nurse specific trauma. And
Well,
so, then the question is, well, then what do we do about it?
yeah.
Because it's in the system's best interest to keep us dysregulated,
Right.
you know,
100%.
in survival mode. And the point of empowerment is reclaiming your nervous system from the system, because we're not going to change the system. I've been around 50 years. It doesn't want to be changed. We all know this. This is not a newsflash. But what can happen is that for those of us who still feel like we need, we want to serve in these ways, is how can I do so in a safe and regulated nervous system inside my own window of tolerance, so it doesn't matter the toxic culture and it doesn't matter the dumpster fires. Because I'm like, I have a friend who's like this. I call her the Buddha incarnate. This gal is just like, she is just so present and so regulated, and just doesn't like really ruffle, and not in a way that she's detached or dissociated. It's a full embodiment. And this is what happens with the nurses who come through my programs, is like we get them out of survival mode. And the mitochondria even have their own version of cell danger response. And so what nurses are not getting, the huge gap to which you referred, is that we are not getting the science around polyvagal theory. We are not getting the science around cell danger response theory and how the mitochondria are utterly depleted. So to the nurse who is out there that might be listening today,
Yeah.
if you are pushing to get through the day, you feel like you're walking in quicksand, and the best you can do on the weekend is couch rot and order in takeout and binge, please hear this and know it to be true. It's physiological. Your mitochondria have been injured through this process, and they cannot produce the amount of energy that is needed to sustain the work demands. And so the body puts itself in survival mode and energy conservation mode. And then we judge ourselves for that. And we say we're lazy, or we're this, or we're that, all the things.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack there.
Yeah, there
But
is.
there is a way out, and that's the
Yeah.
beautiful thing. There's a way out.
So that's kind of my question because, like, I was interviewing another nurse who wrote her own personal journey about being an advocate, speaking up, and being ousted for it. Um, and so she was fired, but she wasn't like in trouble. She's not in trouble with the board of nursing, or her license isn't at risk, but she got fired. And that was the trauma after all the advocacy and all the little chips away at her spirit in the process. So she was reflecting that I can't even look at nursing jobs right now because I'm so worried about the culture within those jobs.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Form That's a form of that's well, this perfect segue. I just love
I
how
know.
conversations go, because we are not scripted. We literally just jumped on this call and
That's
started hanging
right.
out. And and so that's a perfect segue into nurse specific trauma.
Mhm.
And what your colleague and mine is going through is system induced trauma.
Yeah.
And this is so I'm gonna explain it using my hands on a little sandwich analogy. So by virtue of being human, nurses have the trauma exposures and the traumatic events that all humans do.
Mhm.
Acute traumas, chronic traumas. We have our ACEs and our developmental traumas in utero, attachment, all of those, and we have neglect and all the kind of the what some might call the big T stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
to the subcortical brain and body, big T, little t, has no bearing. But,
Yeah,
I'm borrowing from pop culture,
sure.
and I don't agree with that paradigm. So we have this, like every human, we have a baseline trauma load that we're carrying that's unintegrated. And then we come to work. And now when I'm talking about nurse specific trauma, I'm talking about Dr. Karen Foley's work. She has a middle range theory called the middle range theory for neuropsychological trauma, if I can ever get it out of my mouth. Um, and so that's what my work is grounded in. And her theory and my book were coming out at the same time in this beautiful blossoming for our profession, right? So
Yeah.
we have individual trauma by virtue of being human. Then we have the unavoidable traumas that visit nurses through secondary or vicarious trauma, because that's part of our job. And we get maybe one or two PowerPoint slides about that
Yep.
in nursing school. And then there's also, we're trained to handle the disasters, right? And those come with the profession. So that's our baseline. That's our baseline trauma load. If we think in terms of allostatic load. So that's where most nurses live. And then what happens, and it's this piece right here coming in, the top of this sandwich, is the avoidable nurse specific trauma.
Okay.
That is what is driving nurses from the profession. And the system has this, like, well, that's why nurses are changing jobs every 1 to 2 years.
Right.
And that's real. And what we do is, I guess, if you need to change jobs, do so, but let's do so from a regulated nervous system. Let's make those big life
Yeah.
decisions,
Yeah.
from a place of inner safety, right?
Right. Right.
So some examples of nurse specific trauma that is avoidable. The first one that comes to mind is, oftentimes it's the historical trauma, and people are like, well, how can that be avoidable? The past has already happened. I'm like, oh, hold on a minute. What it is like ancestral trauma. Trauma gets transmitted epigenetically
Mm-hmm.
through our cultures and our lived experiences.
Right.
So the historical trauma, and some might call it nurses eating their young, or the Mean Girls Club, or, we have any number of little pop cultural descriptors for that. But what has happened since the beginning of nursing, and because nursing has been an occupationally oppressed class, which is what I learned over in social sciences, we are an oppressed class occupationally. And
Mm-hmm.
so this unintegrated trauma in the collective, it's collective trauma, is getting unknowingly transmitted from one generation of nurses to the next, right? Nurses eating their young. And so it's avoidable because once we become aware of it and we learn how to navigate it within our own self and with one another, it is avoidable, right? It's not
Absolutely.
avoidable till you have awareness.
Right.
Right. Then another great example is workplace violence, which we are all very, very familiar with. And not only from, violence from patients and their families, but also from one another, because we have hurt people, traumatized people, until, it's a circle. It's a loop. And then we have, and I recently spoke at a National League of Nursing conference, and I had over 200 nurses in the audience that day. And I was sharing my own story of all the ways that I had been physically assaulted in my tenure, right? And I had the short laundry list, and I don't want to re-traumatize anyone here, but I think we all know, because we've all lived it, the things that happen. And so as I was reading that list, I asked, just off the cuff, it wasn't even part of my presentation. I asked, well, how many of you have experienced something like that? And I quickly just gave a note. My assistant was in the front row there. I'm like, count the hands, count the hands. And then she said I couldn't count the hands because there were only 12 hands that did not go up out of over 208. And so it's a far more prevalent issue than we think. And so then what happens is, then I'm going to go with that same example of workplace violence, and now we're going to move into another category of nurse specific trauma that is avoidable, and it's called system induced trauma. So what's the first thing that happens if you, like me, like many of our beautiful audience members and community members today, follow policy and run it up the chain of command and do all the things, and you're sitting before your a leader or admin's office, what's the first question they ask you?
What could you have done better?
What could you have done better? What could you I am bleeding at your desk because your security measures failed?
Yeah.
And and so
It's such a
this is
joke.
the system. And another one, and I syndicate a newsletter every week. It's out on all the major outlets, and I can send it to your inbox. And so I write on these topics every week. Another tool of system-induced trauma that is becoming very popular and speaks to your other guests'
Mhm.
experience is the using of the PIP or the HR department, the
Yeah.
performance review program, as a tool to force nurses out who are advocating.
Well, that's what I mean, we had this conversation about the the misunderstanding that HR is there to be a support system for you, and what they really are is to protect the company.
Well, who's paying? Yeah, so follow the money. Who's
Yeah,
paying HR?
right.
You know, right?
And
And
but
that's
we're just like we just go in naively and believe like, "Oh, HR is our little buffer in between the 2 of us," and no. No.
no, no, and that was a big driver. What happened to your friend is
Yeah,
that I have any number of nurses in my programs. Like I can't even. I'm like going through
yeah,
the rosters right now, and I can't even count them
yeah,
in a timely manner. How
yeah.
many nurses I'm working with who have experienced system-induced trauma, just as this guest that you're describing, and
Yeah,
to everyone out
they
there.
case to
Yeah.
show that you're the problem, you're
Yep.
difficult, you're hard to deal with, you're the outlier.
You're not a culture
Yeah,
fit.
you're not a culture fit.
Right. And do we see, though, how this narrative is an extension of this burnout narrative?
Yeah,
Do you
100%.
see how all of this is pointing the finger at the nurse and pointing the finger at the nurse and pointing the finger at the nurse until the nurse is so beat down from the trauma exposure and the dysregulated nervous system and the mitochondria that literally cannot produce the energy that is
Yeah,
required to fight back or advocate. And then when they do, we're going to find a way to get them out, or in one of the nurses that I published her story about the PIP, when she received just a bogus, I mean, on a 30-year nurse who had 30
yep,
years of perfect annual reviews, not one complaint against her ever,
yep,
ever in 3 decades.
yep,
And she was advocating for staffing ratios, because things were dangerous on her unit.
yep,
And all of a sudden now she's got a communication problem.
right.
And all of a sudden, and this is, I'm sure, what happened to our colleague, right? And all of the narrative. And so to the nurses out there who are going through that, it would be so helpful for you to get the support you need in terms of trauma healing and learning how to stay regulated through that process, and also realize what's happening in the big picture. Right? But this
Right,
isn't conspiracy theory. This is happening to millions
yeah,
of nurses worldwide. I work worldwide, all English speaking countries,
right,
so
right,
I've got a lot of nurses. And so what we can do is the system is betting. Their goal is to get the ones who are advocating or low key whistleblowing to either get them removed or to get them to clip their wings and get that square peg back in that round. Because at the end of the day, they want nurses to be good little boys and girls
right.
and to just be compliant and
Compliant,
suck it up, buttercups,
yep.
and do more with less, do more with less. Oh, because you don't have the same mitochondria that the rest of us do. You don't have the same nervous system that the rest of us do, right? And all of that. So I really encourage people, who are in that situation to check this. They're free resources and free weekly live calls with me, and really like make these decisions from a place of a regulated nervous system. So that, because what happens, I mean, if we really want to play this out, what happened to
Yeah.
your friend,
Yeah.
your colleague, and what's happening to so many nurses, including those that are in my programs, is that the system's like, well then, okay, well that nurse quit or was fired, so it's attrition, and they put a little tick in a box, and then they go hire the new grad at $20 an hour less, right? And so what we have is this revolving door, burn and churn, hire to fire paradigm
Right.
that is out there. And if we think about who is bearing the cost of that, I mean, our colleague wrote a whole book. This is how, I mean, I have a profound trauma history myself,
Yeah.
hence myself writing
Right.
such books, right?
Right. Well, and I
And
know the
so,
language you're speaking from my own healing experience that was nothing related to my nursing career, but because I had that knowledge, I could start seeing things for what they were,
right.
right?
Right. But isn't it interesting though? And I'm not like going all conspiracy theory. I'm just saying I live at the bottom of this evidence base, and I'm just saying is what I'm saying. Is I find it very curious as to why the theories and the science that we need to stay regulated in our nervous system and to keep our mitochondria healthy so that we can thrive in practice instead of being stuck in survival mode in some version of flight or flight, sympathetic overdrive, or the dorsal vagal kind of collapse, couch rot, I'm walking in quicksand
Mhm.
mode. I I mean, I can't uh, not see it. Once you
Yeah.
see it, you can't
Once you take
unsee
yeah,
it.
yeah, into it.
And so why is it? And this was one of the drivers of why I left academia, because the AACN, which is the American Association of Colleges of Nursing, I was a nurse educator, so
Right,
this was my gig, right?
right, right, right.
And every 10 years ish, not on a schedule, but ish, they put out new essentials that all educators in the country must follow and must meet with. And that is we're supposed to create sidewalks from those essentials, sidewalks to the NCLEX so the nurses can pass, which is a logical pathway, right? Of course, we need to all be teaching nurses the same thing so that they can all pass NCLEX and go. So I looked when they sent out the AACN essentials for public comment, because that's my thing. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll comment. What are y'all saying about burnout? I was really curious to see what the AACN was recommending. And not only do they not have any of the science in here that we actually need, but they doubled down on the burnout narrative. So for the next 10 years, at least, the nursing curriculums across the country are going to be pointing the finger at the nurse and making them responsible for systemic structural issues in the system, and to continue to carry the burden and the shame. And I want
Mm,
to just bring forward the last kind of big one. There's two other types of nurse specific trauma. I just want to touch on them
yeah,
ever so quickly.
yeah, go
One is insufficient resource trauma. And we all know that, the short staffing, not having the supplies and the people.
yeah.
Okay, so I don't need to talk about that because we're all living it. But the other one that is very subversive, and I would like to bring forward for any nurse who is experiencing this sort of thing, is the near miss, the adverse event, or the sentinel event, and being blamed for those. This is called second victim trauma. And I have marked it as, in my book and in my work, as avoidable, because 90% of the cases, and it's actually much higher, it's closer to like 96 to 98. But I'm just going to conservatively say over 90
Yeah,
percent of the time that it's a system error or a policy gap or a procedural gap or a redundancy, the Swiss cheese effect, right?
right.
And so, but who is carrying? So this past weekend, I did a live event, a nervous system reset live event for nurses. And one of the nurses in the program had an adverse, actually it was a sentinel event 15 years ago, 15 years. And at the time this event occurred, while they were doing their RCA, the root cause analysis, She was called into leadership and admin and over to HR almost every week, and being being essentially gaslit. And she was made to promise that she would never ever make a mistake like this again.
Oh my
The
gosh.
system the system for 90 days before they had concluded their due diligence, before they had investigated, for 90 days the system traumatized system-induced trauma, second victim trauma, all wrapped into one.
Right.
Probably some lateral violence in there as well, and workplace incivility, right? And so here she is in my container 15 years later, and her voice is still wobbling
Yeah.
because of the unintegrated trauma that is still there. And just to close the loop on this story, and I know it's the story for so many out there, is that turns out she didn't do anything wrong. She didn't do one thing wrong, not one thing, not one, zero. There was no write up, there was no ding, there was no occurrence, there was no anything.
Wow.
And also there was no apology.
Right.
And also there was no accountability. And so when we look at the historical trauma, and we look at the insufficient resources, and we look at the workplace violence, we look at the system induced trauma, and now we look at the second victim trauma, what does that do to our trauma sandwich?
Yeah.
It is bowling nurses over. The allostatic trauma exposure load. Now, if we were in the military, if our reproductive organs were, outies instead of innies, then I
Oh,
could
yeah.
wallpaper the city I live in
Yeah.
with the resources and supports that are available for different sectors of male dominated professions, including the military, first responders, law enforcement, and so forth. Nobody is asked to go back out on tour the next day. Everybody gets a debrief. But and so here we are with a higher allostatic trauma load than those professions, and 83% of nurses don't have any support they need. And they're afraid to even go get the help they need because HR isn't safe. The EAP, the employee assistance programs are still proclamating this,
Yeah.
there's something wrong with you, burnout girl, go home and,
Yeah.
have some tea
Yeah.
and journal. And I love tea and I also journal, but all of these things
Not
help
the
to
answer.
alleviate the symptoms, but they don't get to root cause healing. And that's what I do,
Yeah.
in this work. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me, recently I reached out to someone on social media who I thought would be an interesting interview, because her headline and her video was about how she's folding towels instead of being a nurse. Like she quit being a
Right.
nurse to fold towels. So I was like, okay, there's a story there. I'd love to hear more. I reached out to her and she said, I appreciate the invite, but I'm just not talking about nursing at all right now. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't even want to talk about it. And I'm like, I hear you. I get it. You do you and you go heal and whatever you need to do. But I mean, that says, there's a story of trauma there. If you don't
Right.
even want to talk about it because it's so heavy.
Well, it's insufficient resource trauma, and so there's some of our very popular nurse influencers who are talking about this in the social media channels, and it's a variation on the theme of, oh, we'll just have the nurses do it. We don't want to have environmental services here, staffing 24/7, so we'll just have the nurses take out the garbage. We'll just have the nurses do the laundry.
Yeah.
We'll just in NICUs, I'm getting reports in NICUs where pharmacy once prepared these very complicated, you know, neonatal formulas that have to be laser precise, to the grain
Yeah.
precise for some of these littles. And so now it's like, well, we're not going to have pharmacy do it. We'll just have the nurses do it.
Right.
Oh, is the security desk at the front of the hospital? You know what? They need their lunch break. So we'll just have the nurses sit at the security desk with no training and so
Yeah,
what our colleague has experienced is
yeah,
number one, this insufficient resource trauma, and also the fear of the other one, which is system-induced trauma. Because what happens if you advocate? What happens if you run it up the chain of command and follow policy like you're supposed to, like our license and our code of ethics and our scope of practice and all of that requires of us, right?
right, right.
Requires. It's not optional. It's
Yeah,
required.
yeah,
But she can't even feel safe enough to share her experience for that fear of retaliation, which is system induced trauma. And
100%.
so here I am with my Mack truck, girl. I'm driving. I'm driving.
But I love it, and I'm trying to do the same, and
I know
I gue
you are.
I guess I'm, in my mind, and you're gonna have to educate me on what you think. When I took a big look at it, I went, "This is a, abusive, toxic relationship,
Yes.
and, you know, I don't know how to exist within it, and I need to leave and go do something different."
Yeah.
Once you get the Dr. Lorre treatment, can you go back?
Yeah, I'm working with people right now who are in all manner. I've got home health, home hospice, you know, every department in every hospital. I've got community health. I mean, we got the
Yeah,
whole spectrum. And so the answer is yes. And what I advocate for is doing the healing work while you're there if you can. Now, if you cannot, that is real and you are the expert of your body, you are the expert of what you need to do, right?
yeah,
So if you need to pivot, do, but there's a cost associated with that pivot. The system visits on us. We're the
right,
ones that have to do the resumes and the interviews and the onboarding and 8,000
right,
computer-based trainings
right,
and all the meetings, on top of doing the actual job. So we are carrying the burden of the turnover when
right,
we feel that we have no other choice but to pivot every 1 to 2 years and then only to find ourselves back in the same place 6 months, 6 months later. It's usually 3 to 6 months. You're like, great, same
yep,
crap, different day,
yep,
right? And so what I advocate for, if it feels accessible to the
yep,
nurse, is to do the healing work in your nervous system with me or with the provider of your choosing. I'm not a provider. I'm a nurse coach. I'm a nurse scientist. I'm not a healthcare provider. Just make that clear. I never finished the DMP program. Existential crisis put me on a PhD track. But do that work and get your nervous system health and your mitochondria health back online. And then from that place, make your best decision
decision, yep,
in a way that is strategic and not reactive,
love it.
proactive and not reactive. Because so many nurses, and the healthcare system or the organization is like, oh, attrition wasn't our fault.
Yeah,
And so, we have to reclaim. I mean, at the end of the day, if we want to get right down to the root of what I'm doing, yes,
yep,
it's trauma healing, but it's so much more than that for me. We need to reclaim our sovereignty from the system that has eroded our mind, our body, our nervous system, and in many cases, our soul,
yep,
and reclaiming our power back. Because that is the single most important thing. I write about this in the last chapter of my book. The reason that nurses can't collectively come together and effectively bargain together in the ways that are really needed to usher
right,
in what I call nursing 2.0, which is the nurse safety and professional well-being edition of what we do, as opposed to this occupationally oppressed gaslighting thing that's happening
mhm,
and
mhm,
has been happening for centuries. But through the lens of my research, the single biggest barrier to us being able to do what needs to be done in those ways is that we are kept in a perpetual state of dysregulation.
mm,
And I'm just curious, like the omission of these two branches of science from nursing education And I'm just curious about why all of these omissions and why all of these ways, I mean,
You're
I like to,
entertained with purposes only and
right.
curiosity.
Yeah. Like I like to read between read between the lines.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm just like I'm sitting here and I'm like I love what you're doing, and I could have
Thank
used
you.
you a long time ago. Um but how do we support, like, because I just, we became nurses for a reason. And it's this and it's like when I look at my job description, or when I would look at my job description and be like, that makes sense. That's what I want to do. And then you get into the weeds of it and it's so much work, it's the idea of the job is exactly what I want to do. And then the reality of it
Yeah.
is so hard and, to your point, traumatizing at times. And how do we find a better path so that we are giving back our sovereignty and we are giving back, you know, we're critical thinkers. We have 4-year plus degrees. Um,
Right.
there's a lot of talk around how it's the hardest degree, which agree.
Oh,
It's the hardest degree
it's,
you can
yeah.
get. Um, and yet we have no autonomy in a lot of ways, which is part
Yeah.
of the abuse, in my opinion.
Well, and I just am going to use your words because
Yeah.
they're so representative of the collective conditioning. This is conditioning, and this is not critical of any one nurse.
Yeah.
It's like, well, when are they going to give us back? We aren't waiting for someone to give us anything. We are reclaiming that which was taken from us.
Yeah.
We aren't waiting for the system. We aren't waiting for our unit or our culture. What we are doing is we are reclaiming our nervous system health so that when we are regulated in our nervous system, and we didn't go into all of the things because there's not time, but I'll come back if you want to.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yes, yes,
but
yes.
but when we're regulated in our nervous system, what becomes possible that is not possible now is that we can see the big picture. We're calm, cooled, collected, connected, grounded, centered. Our clinical judgment is optimal. Our executive function is optimal. We're supposed to be regulated.
Yeah.
And then we're supposed to have little blips of sympathetic response to deal with the daily day stressors. And then we go back into ventral vagal tone. That's as nature intended, how we've survived the millennia.
Yeah.
But where most nurses practice are in sympathetic or sympathetic overdrive. We can't get off the hamster wheel. And
Yeah.
so when we're there, by definition, as we all know, our field of vision is only this big because there's so much in front of us, that saber-toothed tiger. We either have to fight it or flee it or fawn it
Right, right.
until we collapse when the body puts us in energy conservation mode, and we're now walking underwater while we're practicing, it feels like.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so it's not until that we get out of this survival mode where our executive functions are narrow and we get regulated in our nervous system to where we have optimal executive function in all the ways. That's the
Yeah.
ticket out, but we can't do it from here. So it's like we're not waiting for them. We're reclaiming our nervous systems. We are using our voices. And so here we are with the metaphorical saber-toothed tiger. And for a nurse to make really prudent decisions about where they are in their career and what they need to do next, whether that's leaving their role, staying in their role, leaving the profession, going and doing something else entirely, whatever that is, as long as we are in that sympathetic state or the sympathetic overdrive, which is like where most nurses live, like it is so much overload that you can't get out. Or if
Mhm.
we kind of drop down into that where the body puts us in energy protection mode when that dorsal aspect of the vagus nerve comes online and the mitochondria are in cell danger response and we kind of shut down. By definition, if we're in those 3 states, any one of those, which is where the vast majority of nurses are practicing, by definition, we're fighting the saber-toothed tiger in some fashion, and we're not in ventral vagal tone where we feel safe in our nervous system and where our executive function and our discernment and our reasoning and our ability to do so from a grounded and centered place, we can't make decisions from that place. So when you're running from the saber-toothed tiger, if you will, then all you can do is be reactive.
Yeah.
Where's it going? Where am I going to duck and cover? Where am I going to hide? How am I going to fight it? Right. And so all of those are reactive. And so what I advocate for is any nurse who feels like they have to leave because it's unsafe for them, do that. And so that you don't keep on this cycle of the grass is always greener and then taking on the burden, the administrative burden, the cost, going without a paycheck for a few weeks, the 9 bazillion modules that you have to do to onboard, and all the interviewing process and getting new scrubs or whatever things that are needed, right? This is all at the expense of the nurse
Right.
for the system errors and traumatization that drove you out. So getting that nervous system and that midbrain and our executive function all back into regulation.
Yeah.
That's when we can make the best decisions for ourselves that are proactive, that are aligned with what I call our healer's heart, which is not only what matters to us most, not only is it the love that we are and that is here for us 24/7, but really we want to be working from a place that's in alignment with our deepest dreams, goals, wishes, and desires. And are they possible from within the system? They are. And I have nurses who stay in their role and they stay in their jobs and they create the space, they create the bubble in which they are their unit's Buddha incarnate, if you
Yeah.
will, and they're thriving. Now that doesn't mean that they aren't affected, but they aren't getting bowled over or dysregulated by it. Now other nurses that I work with go through the same process and it's like, you know what? I always thought I wanted to do ABC, but when I really get rid of all of this, static that's in my channel, in my pillar, in my nervous system, I really, really want to do XYZ.
Yeah.
And I never saw it because I only thought ABC was possible.
Yes.
Right. And so no matter where the journey takes one, to make those decisions from a place of being completely safe and supported and regulated in the nervous system, and that way your optimal executive function is online and can really guide you and connect that heart brain connection. And I know you work with this, heart math and all of that, this resonance. Now we're working from a place of resonance instead of dissonance. And I
Yeah.
just got goosebumps as I
Yes.
said it, so
It's resonating. Well, and that's what the academy, the Holistic Nurse Academy was developed for is when you find your center again and you're trying to decide what's next, maybe for me it was a path in holistic nursing. I sat on the fence about whether I was going to become a totally different professional, start over, get a new degree. I looked at lots of different other degrees I could pursue. But as you're talking about this healer's heart, my heart kept saying, "You're a nurse for a reason." And so it kept coming back to nursing, but I just had to look at it a different way. And I found my
right,
path. And so,
right.
that's what we do for the academy is just like show people that there's other modalities you can learn that's within your scope of practice and might be a better fit for you.
Yeah.
Um, Also, so as we kind of wrap up and um, we could just seriously, we're going to talk again because we
We
could
gotta
keep,
do this again. This like, we're just getting warmed up over here,
yeah,
but
exactly. But a nurse, hopefully that's listening to this and wants to participate in this program because it's resonating with them. What are the steps? And is it called the Halion School?
Yeah, it's called so my nonprofit is called the Halen Academy, and
Halen.
Halen is the Old English word for healing.
Right.
And so if I were gonna have more children, I'd name one of them Halen. I'm a
Okay.
little bit obsessed with it. And so through the nonprofit, I mean, you want to go to drlorrelaws.com, and I have there where to get started is the free nurse trauma assessment. First of all, find out if and how you're being affected. That's the
Yeah.
single most, nursing, we start with an assessment always, right? And
Yeah.
so there it is, and I'll be, publishing some articles on what I'm finding now that I have close to 1,000 responses from nurses over the last, 18 months or so. And so then from there, guidance will be given as to next steps. And I have free resources, and I also have programs, like short, quick programs or long transformative programs with, weekly live calls. And so there's any number of ways that a nurse can get the support that they need wherever they are. With their budget and their time constraints.
Okay.
And so take the free nurse assessment that gets you on my weekly newsletter list, and I also send a report with guidance for next steps.
Okay.
And then the programs everything's on the website, but that's probably start with your assessment. See what's going on. See how many of these trauma symptoms
Yeah.
that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
And yeah, and then and then once we have the right diagnosis, and not a medical clinical diagnosis, but a healer's heart diagnosis,
Yeah.
when we come into an awareness that maybe there's something more than just burnout going on here. If I've done all of the things for 20 years and I haven't gotten better, maybe it's not a me thing.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And then what to do from there. So it's all right there, drlorrelaws.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm
Thank
again in
you.
love with the work you're doing. I love a nurse entrepreneur woman who goes after being a Mack truck bulldozer in a direction of helping the profession,
Yeah.
which I feel resonates with me as well.
Yeah.
So let's keep doing the work. And for anyone who's listening, you can go to holisticnurseacademy.org to hear this full conversation, to get resources on holistic nursing and modalities that we teach there. And most importantly, we're building community here. We're building a community. We are changing the narrative from we eat our young and we're the mean girls to we support and lift each other up and we hold space for our own healing and our
Yes.
healer's heart. So
Mm,
yes, yes,
it
yes.
is so. And so it is.
And so it is. Thanks again, Dr. Lori.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.